All right, Steeler fans, it's time to break down the numbers. What I wanted to do is I wanted to look at the offensive side of the football. I wanted to look at the defensive side of the football. And I just wanted to look at season-long averages. Now, if you listen to my podcast at the end of the season, I stopped looking at season-long rankings because the first half success, or in some cases, the first half maybe lack of success, can dictate what your overall averages are, even though how you're playing at the end of the season matters the most. So we were using a lot of the last 5 games, the last 4 games, those averages to get a good feel for what the Steelers were doing well or weren't doing well heading into those games. But now that the season is officially done and it's concluded, I think now is when you can look at those year-long averages and you can really take a look at what the Steelers did right and what the Steelers did wrong. But more so, I want to look at these numbers and say, by looking at these rankings, looking at these averages, what would it take for the Steelers to actually make a change? A serious change. That's what we're talking about throughout this entire podcast in the first half and here. So let's look at the offensive side. We're talking about yardages. So we're going to talk about total yards per game, rushing yards per game, passing yards per game. Let's start with yards per game. The Steelers offense in 2024 averaged 319.4 yards per game, which ranked them 23rd in the league. 23rd in the league. I hope you all understand that when other entities like ESPN, NBC, CBS, whatever, rank teams, they do so by yards gained, not by points, whatever. That's what they use. So according to those metrics, the Steelers ranked as the 23rd ranked offense in 2024. Let's take a little closer look. Rushing yards per game. The Steelers rushed for, on average, 127.4 yards per game. That is 11th overall. This is one of those times where you're going to hear me reference this. The Steelers' early season rushing success, mainly with Justin Fields, and even when Russell Wilson started taking over as a quarterback, those have definitely bolstered the numbers because they did not run the ball well down the stretch. But the 11th ranked overall rushing offense. Passing. The Steelers averaged 192 yards passing on average per game in 2024. Justin Fields' struggles early definitely were bolstered by Russell Wilson throwing the ball well. It's in spurts throughout his tenure as the quarterback. But still, the 192 average is the 27th ranked passing offense in the NFL. 27th. Let's now go to points per game. The Steelers' points per game, 22.4 points per game. Now, what I'd love to do, and I might do this offseason, is to go back, find out, look at Chris Boswell's numbers. How many points did he have? And then say, okay, well, what about the offense? Like, I know they would get them in the field goal range, but how many points did the offense actually score without Chris Boswell kicking field goals? Nonetheless, 22.4, they all count, 22.4 points per game. That ranked 16th, right in the middle, 16th in the league. So then I wanted to dive a little bit deeper. I wanted to dive a little bit into the more of the minutia of the statistics, still looking at season-long averages, but averages that I think are important and tell a part of the story for this offense. First stat I looked up, third down offense. Okay, so the Steelers converted on third down 39.5% of the time. That is below 40%. It's typically failure in terms of those crucial, or as Mike Tomlin calls them, weighty downs. That ranked 16th in the league. 16th. I also wanted to look at the red zone. So how did the Steelers do as it pertains to red zone success? This is red zone trips that equate in a touchdown, not a field goal, a touchdown. The Steelers' red zone offense converted into touchdowns 48.21% of the time. You might be thinking, Jeff, that sounds pretty good. That's almost 50%. No, that's 29th. They had the 29th out of 32 teams, 29th best red zone offense as it pertains to converting to touchdowns. That was a huge issue all season long. Let's continue. I wanted to look at averages per attempt. So we did rushing yards per attempt and passing yards per attempt. So let's look at passing yards per attempt first. They averaged 7.2 average. That's an average yards per attempt, which was 15th in the league. Okay. Passing yards per attempt, 7.2, 15th. As for the rushing yards per attempt, because remember, you look at the overall rushing numbers, 127.4, that's 11th. That's fantastic. Rushing yards per attempt, 4.1, that's tied for 20th. So those numbers do not mirror one another at all. The last statistic I looked up was turnovers. The Steelers finished the season with 17 turnovers, offensive turning the ball over. They had 6 interceptions and 11 fumbles. Now, this includes the 6 games that Justin Fields was the quarterback. He fumbled the ball on occasion. We all know Russell Wilson had his issues down the stretch, but they had 17. That was ninth best number in terms of you don't want to be. If you're not turning it over, you're higher on this ranking. So it's not a bad spot to be as a top 10 in terms of turning the ball over. So when you look at all these rankings, I just want to run down the rankings. I'm not going to go what it is. Just listen to these rankings: 23rd, 11th, 27th, 16, 16, 29th, 15, tied for 20, and 9th. So the one thing I see when I look at these rankings, look at these numbers, is that the Steelers offense didn't do anything good/great. They were just okay. They were just a team that was just okay. And early in the season, they didn't turn it over. I mean, that was Justin Fields' big thing. He might have put the ball on the turf, but they always recovered it. They got lucky in that sense. But they didn't turn it over. And so what they were doing on the defensive side, which we'll get to in a second, the offense wasn't turning it over. And since they didn't do that, that was it. That was how they were seeing success. Just don't turn it over. Sound familiar, right? Just don't kill us is what Mike Tomlin famously says. And that was it. But the one thing I noticed when I look at these rankings, this is the last thing I'm going to say about the offense, is that even with Russell Wilson, even with Justin Fields, it doesn't matter. With Arthur Smith at the helm, the one thing he has in common with Matt Canada, it's not second and long runs. It is the fact that the Steelers had no offensive identity. They had nothing that they could hang their hat on and say, you know what, when all hell's breaking loose, we can still do this one thing. This is the one thing that we can still do well. They didn't have that. They didn't have that at all. No identity offensively. And the fact that they went through an entire season and a playoff game, and they never found one thing that they did well. Injuries, don't care. Like, seriously, every team has them. People want to talk about the offensive line was decimated. God, that's a bunch of BS. That's an excuse. No, figure out something you do well and then do it again and do it again and keep doing it again, because that's your identity. The Steelers failed to do that. So it was an okay group for the 2024 season. Let's look at defense now. Same thing. We're going to look at the averages. We're going to see how they did, how they finished up. Yards per game. The Steelers defense gave up 326.7 yards per game, which was 12th in the league. So that means that they finished, according to most metrics, the 12th best defense in the NFL. Let's look at averages in terms of rushing yards per game. They surrendered 98.7 yards per game. That was 6th. Now, granted, this is not including the postseason game. So the 200 yards would have definitely put them over 100, but that's not included. It's just the regular season. So that 98.7 was the 6th best number in the NFL. And when you look at the passing yards per game, now we're looking at passing yards per game. The Steelers surrendered 228.0 passing yards a game. 228. That was the 25th ranked pass defense in the league. So you have the 12th overall, 6th in rushing, 25th in pass defense. What about points per game? They surrendered 20.4 points per game in 2024, and that was the 8th best in the NFL. Okay, these are decent numbers. So let's look at third down success. Third down defense, they surrendered a first down 35.3% of the time. That was actually the second best. They actually started to figure that out as it went along. But remember, these are season-long averages. I don't want people to think, like, well, the last 5 games that they lost, their third down defense sucked. It did at times. But I'm saying that from an overarching perspective, This is what it looks like for the season. I looked at red zone defense. At one point, they were a top 10 group. That definitely fell off as the season progressed. The red zone defense allowed a touchdown 55.38% of the time. 55% of the time. That was 14th in the NFL. The red zone defense. And that, again, is a red zone trip that equates in a touchdown. 55% of the time they surrendered a touchdown. Let's look at averages for passing and for rushing. So the average pass thrown against the Steelers gained 7.1 yards in the air. That is in the bottom third. There were so many at 7.1. It was tough to look at it. I didn't feel like doing all that. So it's in the bottom third of the league. I'll put it that way. And the average rushing yards per attempt, 4.1 yards per rush. That is tied for fourth in terms of defensively. I looked at two other takeaways or two other stats, one of them, for the defense. One of them was taking the football away. They tied for first in 2024 with 33 takeaways. They had 17 interceptions and 16 fumble recoveries. Pretty impressive. That's a pretty impressive number. And then the only other stat that I wanted to look at were sacks. The Steelers only had 40 sacks on the season. That's it. The league leading sack team was the Denver Broncos in the regular season with 63. Then the Baltimore Ravens with 54. The Dallas Cowboys with 52. Those were the top three. The Steelers just had 40. They totaled 40. So what do we think when we look at these numbers? Let's look at the rankings like we did on the offensive side. 12th, 6th, 25th, 8th, 2nd, 14th, 4th, 1st, and then middle of the road sacks. So what do we look at there? Well, statistically, this is still a pretty good defense. They have their flaws, especially in the secondary, but there's more to it than that. What happened? So one thing that definitely happened was the takeaways down the stretch dried up. And as the takeaways were drying up, the turnovers were kicking up. They were starting to turn the ball over more. That was a recipe for disaster for the Steelers. Talked about their razor thin victory margin for victory. They just can't make those mistakes. So that is honestly one of the things that happened. Also, when you don't have a pass rush, the secondary got exposed. So Alex Highsmith was hurt for a stretch. Nick Herbig was hurt for a stretch. TJ Watt was hurt down the stretch. That equated in not having a very good pass rush. And when you're paying someone like Larry Ogunjobi, who should be young and much more active and spry than Cam Hayward, he was not. Keanu Benton didn't have a great sophomore season either. And so when you look at these factors, you just saw that the Steelers, they didn't like to blitz a lot. They wanted to just send their front, keep the coverage consistent in the back, and hope that the back end can take care of things. Well, the back end couldn't take care of things when all of a sudden the Steelers weren't getting home offensively or defensively. They weren't getting to the quarterback. That's what happened. Takeaways dried up. Can't get to the quarterback. You're not going to blitz because, Lord forbid, they send more than they can block. And because of that, the secondary is exposed. That's what happened with the Steelers defense. So when you look at all these numbers, and I know I just went through a lot, what is it going to take for the Steelers to make some serious changes? Is it going to take an offense that just completely sucks worse than Matt Canada for them to say we need to think of something new? Is it going to take just complete ineptitude in one area of the offense or the defense for them to say maybe we need to change something? Is it the sack numbers continuing to go down that they need to think, well, if we're not going to fire Tara Lawson, we need to bring in someone to run the pass rush and to get TJ Watt in a position to actually get to the quarterback and to wreak havoc? Is that what needs to be done? I don't know. But that's the ongoing question. And unfortunately, there is no answer here. There is no answer for what will it take for the Steelers to see serious changes with the Steelers. What is it going to take? We've already seen there's no playoff success. We saw how they stumbled down the stretch. We saw an offense that was inept at times. We saw a defense that collapsed like a cheap lawn chair down the stretch. And all of it results in what kind of change? What kind of change have we seen in that first initial week? Nothing. And that's one of the reasons why I said in my letter from the editor, on the website, steelcurtainnetwork.com, that I understand it. If fans are dejected, I understand if they're exhausted. I understand if fans are openly just saying, I don't know what this team is doing anymore, because it just seems like they're just, let's run it back. Let's run it back. Well, that's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Something that Mike Tomlin said they weren't going to do. Sure as hell looks like they are. But maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe today, Monday, they make some serious changes. I hope that's the case. I hope that this has such a short shelf life that we see some serious changes. I don't expect it, but maybe that's what will happen. We'll see. But make sure you're paying attention to steelcurtainnetwork.com. We'll have all your information there on that website. Make sure you're checking out the new look of the website on Tuesday. Also, don't forget on Tuesday morning to be on the lookout for my mailbag tweet. It's at jhartman, HARTMAN_PIT. I put out the tweet. You respond. I answer that question live on Wednesday. But that does it for me, folks. Time to see what happens this offseason. Let's see what they have cooked up. It might be a whole lot of nothing. But in the meantime, I hope you all had a great weekend. Hope you have a good start to the week. You know, I finish these up. Be safe, be kind, and God bless. Have a great start to your week. We'll see you on Wednesday. Go Steelers.